etc. And I'll explain those sponsors to you as we go along. Now, once again this year, folks, we will be live streaming the morning session via YouTube, thanks to Jack from Flow Motion Media. So a little reminder, just to please be aware of the volume and the language, no dropping the magics anywhere near the microphones, please. So if you prefer to not be captured in photos as well, please just let Kim know at the back as well. Can I ask also a big favour, folks, that please during the conference, especially today, please don't approach the AV staff at the back of the room. They're going to be very, very busy during the day. If you've got any questions or concerns or anything you need to speak of, please see Kim, Ross or Andrew. Now, it's worth mentioning as well for you all that you may have noticed at the back there, the Brass Monkey little plug-in fridge and the Project Catalyst fishing shirt on display at the entrance as well. Now, one lucky winner amongst you is going to take that home. It's valued at over $300. All you need to do, folks, you'll notice that you've all got a feedback form in front of you. What we'd love you to do, and to be in the running for that prize, is to fill that in. And can I just ask as well that during the day, it's going to be a very good idea after each session, just jot some notes down on that. But at the end of the day, if you return that, they're going to give you a raffle ticket. That way, you're in the draw. So all good. A little bit of housekeeping before we go any further as well. For a start, toilets. You ready for the distinction between doors here? Men, that is your door. Straight out that exit door is the men's toilet. Ladies, straight out that door. If you walk about 10 metres that way, it will be on your left. That's where the toilets are. Of course, being a conference like this, can I ask you all, just right now, just to make sure that the mobile phones are switched to silent? Yep. Just to make sure that there's no wolf whistles and you're copping the odd sledge from people at your table or anything like that. Also, just in the event of fire emergency, please leave the room in an orderly fashion. The staff will help you directionally out. Can I also mention as well for you that there will be tea, coffee and some cold refreshments, all thanks to Coca-Cola. So big round of applause for Coca-Cola during the day. Thank you very much for those refreshments, Coke. Now, again, I know COVID seems like a thing of the past, but can I please ask that we do not want to be in the news as a super spreader event. So the way that your tables and chairs are set, please don't move them if that's okay. They are set strategically for that purpose. Can we ask again, wash your hands please, and if you feel unwell or anything like that, please retire to your room and let someone know. That would be very handy. All right. So, my favourite quote to start conferences, ladies and gentlemen, is a quote from a US Supreme Justice back in the 30s, Oliver Wendell Holmes. And his quote is, "A mind once stretched by a new idea never regains its original dimension." So, people, I hope you're ready to get those minds stretching this morning. Our first speaker this morning is Dr. Catalina Reyes-Nivia, the Associate Director of Water Quality for the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. Now, she's passionate and committed environmental researcher and program manager, and in research and practical impact-driven implementation of projects focused on long-term dynamics, health conditions, water quality and climatic impacts on catchments, coastal and marine ecosystems in the Caribbean and Australia as well. She's also here to give us an update on the water quality program and a progress update as well. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage Catalina. Would you like this on?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me well? Yep, good. Well, my name is Catalina Reyes. I am the Associate Director of the Water Quality Program at the Great Barrier Reef Foundation. Before I start, I would like to thank Project Catalyst for the great opportunity to be here today and for me to be able to speak to you all key partners of the process we've been through over the last 4.5 years. Back in 2018, a partnership between the Australian Government Reef Trust and the Great Barrier Reef Foundation was shaped. The Reef Trust Partnership, or RTP, as we call it, is a 6-year initiative with the main goal of achieving significant and measurable impacts in improving the health of the Great Barrier Reef. For that, a large investment of $443 million were allocated through those 6 key programs you see in the slide. And it is expected the partnership will be finished by June 2024. In particular, the water quality program is mainly focused on accelerating all the efforts in support of water quality targets and outcomes that are set in the Reef 2050 Water Quality Improvement Plan. We do recognize this is complex, that we're talking about large spatial scale, that there are a lot of needs to address water quality issues, and therefore the decision was to allocate almost half of those funds to improve water quality from different avenues or components, as you can see in the figure. It also shows the funds split components, with the majority of the funds being allocated to on-ground actions and interventions. Those are part of the regional programs in purple, as you can see, and also for early investment activities in red. But before I provide you more detail about these 2 programs, I would like to give you a very high-level overview of the other work streams we've been working on. The traditional owner-led reef protection initiative, it was decided at the beginning of the program that all the foundation wanted to make a strategic decision on how to support the co-design of this program. So 10% of the funds from each component was taken in support of this program. So it was really good because we secured $60 million in support of traditional owner reef protection initiatives. In particular, related to water quality, we have had 2 grant rounds of healthy water projects. There are 27 projects underway with 22 traditional owners involved. There are other initiatives and projects going on, but I'm just not gonna talk about in detail to those ones, just to highlight that the foundation is working really hard on elevating the voice of traditional owners and recognizing that they play a critical role in the environmental space. The work on the conservation and protection is concentrated in less disturbed catchments, specifically the Eastern Cape York. There are 7 projects underway. All are aiming to reduce sediment runoff. The activities include gully remediation, roads maintenance, fire management, etc. And there is traditional owner involvement in most of these projects. The innovation program came from a need for a transformational change in the way we fund, design, and implement water quality improvement activities. We identified 4 priority areas for investment that you can see in the slide. There are 22 projects being funded. Some of them have been completed, but when we identify a lot of potential in these projects to lead to a step change in the way we do things in the water quality space, we have been extended those projects. The early investment component was the very first grant round the water quality program funded, and the idea was to provide continuity to projects that were already implementing on-ground actions in support of water quality. But it was also very important for us to keep or maintain delivery and extension capacity in the regions. So there were 11 projects as part of this component. They are all finished, and they certainly laid the foundation for the design of the regional programs. The foundation supported Project Catalyst as part of these early investment activities, and it was really good because the project successfully deliver a lot of innovation trials, a 3-year water quality monitoring program, a lot of grower engagement, exchange of knowledge in the Mackay Whitsundays, the Burdekin and the Wet Tropic regions. Okay, now, the regional programs, the idea behind for this program was to design an approach that will achieve the greatest reductions in priority pollutants. So for that, sorry, I just have to, yeah, the greatest, and so for that we engage an independent consultant that provides us series of investment scenarios that guided the decision-making process on how much to invest, where, what pollutant to address, what type of practices to implement, etc. So as a result of this work, we were able to set up 10 regional programs that you can see in the map. Each one has an associated target pollutant or pollutants in 2 cases, and also the funds allocated. So this model has provided clear guidance on where to go, and is also guiding our on-ground delivery providers. The figure in the lower part of the slide is to show you how much the RTP water quality program is contributing towards the water quality improvement plan targets. So I guess we can all appreciate that we have a large investment. We are utilizing that investment in a very cost-effective way, and still the progress to those water quality improvement targets is modest. So we still have to do a lot of work in the space and probably come up with much more creative ideas. Okay, this is to show you how we are tracking in terms of specific pollutant reductions. So there are 5 sugarcane regions addressing dissolving organic nitrogen. You can see at the right of the slide the target that we set up at the beginning of the program. We call them GBRF target. So the 3 upper regions have met the target or are really close to do so. So really good to see those outcomes. The 2 in the lower part are progressing towards what we call the contracted target. So I guess the message here is just to show you that there is still a gap between what we were able to contract and to what we expect. In terms of pesticides, there are 2 regions addressing this, and they both have met the target, and they are actually performing above and beyond, so really pleased to see those outcomes so far. Here is a summary of our progress to date at the regional program level. We have committed most of the funds so far, more than 90%. There are 77 projects underway across 20 reef catchments. Most of these projects are implementing land management practices and therefore improving water quality and farming productivity. The first purple bead relates to the 5 grazing programs. That includes Upper Herbert, Upper Annis Burdekin, the Triple B, Fitzroy, and the Mary. You can see that there is a lot of graziers engaged in the programs, impacting many, many hectares, and it also includes a part of grazing land management practices, landscape remediation activities. So it is a big effort going on here, but still, as you can appreciate in the lower part of the slide, the progress to the target is still modest. Okay, in the right part, the purple part, relates to the summary of the sugarcane programs. So then again, massive farmer engagement, the proportion of the land and the sugarcane impacting is really, really significant. And the result is that the progress to target in terms of dissolving organic nitrogen and pesticide is amazing. So we're very pleased to see the progress to date. This is a summary of how the 3 project catalysts that have been funded by the foundation are contributing to the core goals of our program. So with a total investment of $5.5 million, catalysts have engaged about 150 farmers. They are all implementing innovative farming practices, improving nutrient management plans, and therefore have positively impacted about 14,000 hectares. So this is an amazing piece of work. It is contributing to our program targets, and I guess most importantly is promoting a healthier and better environment, but also a prosperous and productive sugarcane industry. Okay, my final thoughts, I have a lot, but I selected 3 for this forum. First is, I hope you might appreciate that the RTP Water Quality Program has been a monumental piece of work. We decided to implement a new model, and with that, challenges comes in, and we understand that it's difficult to accept when you do things different, and it takes time to understand and trust. Despite those challenges, we have built strong partnerships, and therefore, a collaborative approach is core to our program, and I think is core for the way forward. And finally, the use of the target model has been essential for the delivery of the program for many reasons, but probably 2 key ones. One, it provides accountability and transparency, and it has also brought much more focus in the way we select and implement on-ground projects, maximizing outcomes. So we are confident the RTP Water Quality Program will deliver not only great environmental outcomes and better water quality, but also better farming practices and a productive agricultural industry. That's it from me. Thank you very much. Questions? No questions? No questions? Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome, thank Catalina again, please. It really was a fascinating summary and progress update on the water quality program and the targets that are being met as well. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker this morning is a tropical fisheries researcher with a long history of marine conservation, who also leads the not-for-profit organisation pioneering offshore coral nurseries on the Great Barrier Reef. He's here to discuss the broader context of climate change for us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please give a warm welcome to Ryan Donnelly. Clicker there, just green arrow up the top, and play in the middle.
All right.
That's the one.
Right, thanks very much. No connection to the cane industry, I'm afraid, but I have been in the fishing industry for many years, and I know that anything goes wrong in the sea, it's the fishing industry. Anything goes wrong in the sea as a result of changes in the land falls back to the agriculture industry. And so I understand where the sentiment lies. Right, so. But today I want to talk about biodiversity, because biodiversity is our greatest strength in combating the changes that are being brought around from industrialisation the last couple of 100 years. Okay. Is that the right one? Nope. That's him, found it. The first part of my talk today is going to take us way back into time. It's going to talk about life on Earth and some of the changes that our dynamic environment has endured, to try and get some context on where we're at, the nature of the challenge, and where the water quality improvement fits into that, because there's a dividend for what I do as well. So, like the lady says there, everything has to do with biodiversity. Climate change is the biggest cause of biodiversity decline, but it's also our best asset in terms of adaptive capacity as we move forward. So on the first part of this thing, I'll talk about our dynamic big blue planet, because things have been changing on our planet for 4.5 billion years. So I want to put some of these changes into some perspective. 4.5 billion years ago, the planet was formed. We didn't get life on Earth for another 800 million years until some magic of nature brought water, hydrogen and carbon together, and some bit of magic that formed the polymers of DNA, RNA and protein, the building blocks of life. But it wasn't until the Cambrian period, some 540 million years ago, that we had the big biodiversity Big Bang. That's the Cambrian explosion. This is when life on Earth really took off, and we started to see divergence of the species and the establishment of the phyla that we understand in the taxonomic tree today. Why I say divergence is it's when we start to see species occupying niches and start to understand the species have relationships with one another. It's basically the birthplace of ecology. And the thing about that is that you have to perform a function when you occupy a niche. And that function might be that you are a predator. It might be that you are a prey species. But the evolution at this time was about adopting life history strategies that saw you be a short-lived, highly fecund species, likely to be a prey species, or to be a long-lived, large-bodied species that doesn't have a lot of babies, and you're likely to be a predator species. And you occupy other niches within the environment, such as herbivory or carnivory. The important thing about this, though, is it took 13 to 25 million years for this to be established. It's a very, very long time frame, and that's the theme I want to hit on in all these changes in our lifetime. They are massive periods of time to establish all this sort of stuff. The last point, though, I want to stress, 99% of all species in the history of our blue planet are extinct. We roll through species. As the environment changes, the niches change. If you're not fulfilling that function in that niche, somebody else will. So we turn species over. That's the fact of life with biodiversity. We've had 5 major extinction events, and over the last 500 million years, 500 million years. The first one, well, I'll go straight to the third one, but importantly, scientists talk about extinction events where you lose more than 75% of all the species on the planet in a blink of an eye in geological terms. Now, that geological terms is anything under 2.8 million years. So, again, this is all about the time frames. I don't know if you can read any of that. I'll talk about the Permian Triassic. It's the big one in the middle, also known as the Great Dying. Now, I've picked this one out because there are some familiar themes along the way here. Each one of these extinction events comes about by changes in temperature and changes to ocean chemistry. And much of the extinction event is in the sea. Now, whether that's a rise in temperature or a reduction in temperature, as it is with the dinosaurs at the end Cretaceous, or the end Permian one there, which is the Great Dying, some of the characteristics here are very similar. I'll point out that this period started with elevated carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This time it came from incredible volcan activity in Siberia. It elevated temperatures by about 9 degrees Celsius. It changed the water chemistry. We got ocean acidification. And it affected all the species that exude a calcium carbonate exoskeleton. A little bit like what we're experiencing now with concentrations of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere and ocean acidification. Over the next decades or centuries is going to change life on Earth as we know it. Importantly, the Great Dying took 60,000 to 200,000 years to occur. So it's not like an elderly trilobite looked out across the landscape and said, well, things weren't like that when I was a kid, because they were. There was no generation that ever saw any changes during this blip in geological time. That's the important thing to remember out of it. We'll jump forward, we'll go over the top of the dinosaurs. and go straight into the Anthropocene. Now, this is the period where humanity has become the dominant driver in all of ecology, where we see selection pressures based on our modification of the landscape and how we are now driving the selection trajectory for many, many species. Little bit of a picture at the bottom there. There's now 128,000 blah, blah, blah on the IUCN red list, of which a whole heap of them are now earmarked for extinction. The reason I'm not going too closely into those numbers is that they change all the time, and those figures are about 5 years old. They'll differ. Point is, they're big numbers. The Industrial Revolution brought us about all sorts of changes in the way we undertook production. All sorts of production efficiencies, mechanisation, increases in the standard of living, but it did bring a reliance on coal, and then a development of the internal combustion engine and a reliance on oil. But there was an incredible dividend for the population of the planet, and each one of those people needed a place to live, they need clean water to drink, they need food to eat. They gathered in cities, so they've got to have infrastructure to service all those things. The changes started to manifest around about the middle of last century, when we start to see what happens when you trap carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, a little bit like the end Permi event that took 600,000 years to manifest. We're seeing it manifest in 150 years. And what we're seeing now is that the average temperatures relative to the mid-century average are well above average. And it's not like we're all, the sky's falling in or anything like that, but we are heading on a trajectory that we need to turn around. Scientists talk about a sixth extinction event, and I want to make the difference between the previous extinction events and the one that's being spoken about in scientific terms these days, is that the previous ones were wholly and solely natural phenomena. They took part over an enormous body of time, whereas the one we're dealing with now has come about because of the Industrial Revolution a couple of hundred years ago. Because we have driven that through advances in our technology and our adoption of that technology, we're also in a position to turn it around. The important part of this slide, though, is that last dot point. 9 degrees in the end Permian event, we look like going to about 2 degrees because there's a lot of activity around addressing climate change. But the speed with which we're going to get there is really going to challenge the adaptive capacity of every species on the planet. So biodiversity, the very thing that we need to increase our adaptive capacity, is the very thing that is going to be the victim of it. So we need to turn that around. So the take-home message, and I sound like I'm talking about the sky tumbling down, but the point is, because this has only happened in the last couple of hundred years, we can turn it around. Right? So the point is, it's everybody's problem. Everybody across the planet has a role to play in this. So we take a different mindset and we can get different results. The 3 things that scientists tell us that we need to be doing: obviously drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, remove carbon from the atmosphere, sequestration, plant lots of trees, there's some high-tech approaches to that as well, and restore the function of a natural environment. We don't just cherry-pick one of these, 2 of these. We've got to do all 3 of them, and we do them globally. And we all have a little role to play in that. So finally, I get to the Great Barrier Reef, my neck of the woods. It's a big place, as we all know. 14 degrees of latitude gives it a big waterbed effect. You have something, if a cyclone crosses the coast in the far north, you know that down south you're not affected by that. So the size of the thing is the strength of it. The biodiversity of the place is also the strength of it because of those ecological relationships that are in play. It means that the functions of thousands of species gives that extra resilience and resistance to events. Oops, let me go back. So you've probably seen all this. Warm water gives you greater convection when you've got a very low pressure system overhead. So it's not a case of more cyclones, but it is a case of more category 4 and 5, the destructive ones. Now this graphic is a bit out of date now, but it's between 2005 and 2015. and it shows all the cyclones that have affected the Great Barrier Reef. The reason I put this up is we thought that the size of the Great Barrier Reef was going to be its best defence, but these big cyclones covered just about the whole lot of it. In coral bleaching, we never saw coral bleaching on a grand scale until 1982, and we'll look back on that 1982 event now and say, well, that's not mass coral bleaching. Again, in 1998, that was the big one, or so we thought. We look back at that now and say, well, that's not a big one either. 2016, 17, 20 and 22, we're starting to see things that are happening far more frequently, far more severe, and it's reducing the ability for the environment to recover in between time. And of course, crown of thorn starfish, natural part of the ecology. Its ecological limiter is a Triton snail, but it's eaten when those things are babies. So when you've got a perfect storm, elevated sea surface temperatures, elevated nutrients, then you get greater primary productivity and greater survival of the larvae of crown of thorn starfish and other things as well. But once they get away, they can be hard to stop, and they love a fast-growing acropora species of coral, and they'll chew through them very quickly. They're becoming a real problem for us. So building the resilience of the environment is what is the important thing, and this is all part of the restoration, the third component of it. There are lots of elements to that. Water quality is everybody's business. We live in a seasonal, high rainfall part of the world. And once you break the land, break the ground, you modify it in any way. It doesn't matter if it's settlement, whether it's transport, whether it's agriculture, whatever it is, you're going to affect the water quality in our neck of the woods. It doesn't fall at anyone's feet to fix that. It's everybody's problem. Fishing has been a big one. I tell you, I've seen changes in the fishing industry over the last 40 years that are incredible. From being way oversubscribed to now being not commercially viable in many respects. All those other things. We've got to do them all and not cherry pick any of them, and we've got to do them all in unison. So, who does that? I mean, it's everyone. It's all those agencies, it's all those research institutions, agriculture and land management, what you're here today to talk about. Fantastic, some of the things I saw in that first presentation. So what it is that I do? So, I just try and help the reef to recover after disturbance, and we're at the bottom of the ladder. That's where we're at, and as the first speaker said, working together is going to be the critical thing. The 2016 mass coral bleaching event was the thing that kicked it off for us. It surprised a lot of people because where it occurred off the coast of Cape York, basically from Port Douglas through to Cape York, there's hardly any fishing in there. There's no agriculture. So the thinking that the everyday pressures affect the resistance of these systems to the impacts of climate change, in this case coral bleaching, got thrown out the window. It could have been a lot worse. Cyclone Winston went across the Fiji Islands as a Category 5 system, 2nd and 3rd of February in that year. Went down towards New Zealand, which is starting to understand what cyclones are about, and then it swung back up onto the Great Barrier Reef as a tropical depression, brought big heavy banks of cloud, lots and lots of rain, and eased the conditions. Otherwise, the 2016 event would have been about 3 times the size. So we actually dodged a bullet and yet had the worst event of all time. But what it did do was it prompted the formation of my organisation, and it was out of, we've got to do something. So that's how it all started. Reef restoration was not permitted in the marine park at that time, so yeah, we had a bit of a problem. Since then, we've seen another one in 2017 in conjunction with Cyclone Debbie that ripped the guts out of Flinders Reef in the Coral Sea before coming down across the Great Barrier Reef and making landfall in Whitsundays. And then in the southern part of the Great Barrier Reef, the inshore reefs in 2020 and further south again, all the way down to Gladstone in 2022. Those 2 events happened on the shoulder of the season, so whilst there was a lot of coral bleaching, there wasn't a lot of mortality, which is the thing about coral bleaching. If the weather does change, then it does change for you. So what do? We grow, we take loose colonies off the reef. These are the ones that have broken free from wave action. Once they've lost their shore foot, they're not going to grow anymore. So we repurpose them basically. We collect them, we cut them up into small pieces with a coral saw. And we do that in partnership with our tourism operators. So we could be on the back deck of a boat, we could be on a pontoon, or we could be on a beach. And then we stick them up into our tree frames, which they look a bit like an antenna, suspended in the water column. Here the coral pieces don't get attacked by parasites, they don't get eaten by predators, and importantly, they don't get attacked by each other, because a coral reef is an absolute jungle and it's a deadly place as well. So given that environment, these coral pieces that were going to die regain their vitality and they start to get new growth shoots on them. On each one of those branches, we classify them by genotype. So they basically come from the same colony. So they've got the same DNA coding, which is important when we go to outplant. And the idea is that we accelerate the natural process of recovery. And I'll get to our reasons for that in a minute. When we outplant them, we grow them into these larger things that you can see there, which is, depending on the species, they have different growth habits. And then we plant them in these genotype clusters and we secure them to the reef with a nail and a wire which exerts downward pressure on it. So there's no chemicals, there's nothing, we're not introducing new things into the sea. Because they're from the same genotype, they grow towards each other and they fuse. So we fast track the formation of structurally complex habitat, and we do that because we want to have the lower parts of the trophic food chain come in and occupy those bits of habitat, and then we want to fast track to the point where those colonies are spawning and regenerating reefs as nature intended, which is our best way. Now, speaking of that, last November out at Fitzroy Island we had success from our first outplants, where we spent most of the night in the water and we were able to witness our first outplants spawning and go off and regenerate the reef as nature intended. Now, I think the time frame that it took us to get to there we can improve on, but it was a threshold moment for us and gave us a lot of confidence. I just want to take you back to biodiversity though, because when I was talking about earlier on the birth of ecology and how we start to occupy niches, and some become fast growing, short-lived, lots of babies. The scene on the left there with all the Acroporidae families, there you got the branching Acropora corals and the plating Montipora corals. These are early stage succession species, so these play a critical role in occupying space, creating cryptic habitat, and they exert a lot of calcium carbonate. So these are reef builders, but they don't, with the exception of an early spawning settlement, there's not a lot of biodiversity in that. It takes time, and at the other end of the spectrum, you've got these big corals. Now, the important thing about these big corals is they take a long, long time to grow. They're like old growth trees in a forest. They have innumerable specialist roles in the environment, including the relationships with numerous other species. So when we get an increase in frequency of the disturbance events, whether it's a cyclone, whether it's bleaching, or whether it's a crown of thorns starfish infestation, the period in between is the recovery period. Now, if that period starts to get short, we end up only with the pioneer species, and we don't have the biodiversity. And if we start to lose the specialists, the one with the complex relationships with the other species in the environment, then we start to see a decline in diversity. And because diversity equals functionality, we start to have an unstable environment and leaves it more open to things like eutrophication or disease or and change in the balance of nature. So what we try and do is we try and create the habitat for key functional groups. So we take what we know about coral reefs and say, well, okay, we need to be able to create habitat that's going to attract species that we just can't afford to lose. Right? There's an old saying that we're all born equal, but some of us are more equal than others. There's an element of truth to that. We can't afford to be losing herbivorous fish species. We can't afford to be losing big-bodied piscivore species. It comes back to fishing, but it also comes back to habitat and maintaining a balance of nature. So I am well aware that we're going to lose a bunch of species. So we need to be catering, I need to be catering for that in the marine environment. So back to Reef Restoration Foundation, as the first cab off the rank, when you're the first one over the wall, you spill the most claret, and we had very tough permit conditions on our first one. We had to collect so much data only to prove that we were doing something beneficial rather than being detrimental. We did that, so now we're on the other side. We've moved one step up the ladder. Importantly, whilst we're doing a site stewardship thing, if you looked at it as a snapshot in time, you'd say, well, that's a waste of time because you're doing a little pinprick on the world's biggest reef. But we are on a trajectory, which I'll get to in a minute. And importantly, it's a community-based organisation. All of our divers are rescue certified divers from within our local community. Workplace health and safety is making it harder and harder. That qualification is going to go up again. And we're resourced not by government, we're resourced by the generosity of individuals within our community and increasingly globally. To the point now where I've contacted daily, how can I help? And the reason I call this as being on a journey is because whilst reef restoration has been around in Indonesia for 30 years, trying to rectify coral reefs that provide nutrition to people, but they've been destroyed through dynamite fishing. In the Caribbean, it's been around for about 20 years. They've got some serious problems there with a coral tissue necrosis disease it's killing their limited biodiversity. Complex jurisdictional environment surrounded by different countries, big rivers flowing into the Gulf of Mexico and ultimately into the Caribbean. And of course, they are seeing big hurricanes go through there. So they're in a bit of trouble. Here in Australia, we're at a bit of a different system. The Great Barrier Reef has sprung back since the 5 years, in the north at least, since our last major event, which tells me that the underlying health is pretty good, far better than any other reef system anywhere in the world. But the future is going to be more and more collaboration. And like the first speaker said about the Reef Restoration and Adaptation Program, which was part of one of the work areas from Great Barrier Reef Foundation and Reef Trust. I was on the same speaker program with a gentleman on my left there, who's the CEO of AIMS, and we had a chat about, well, I'm doing stuff at the local scale, and he said, well, I'm doing stuff at the reef scale, but I've got a $100 million budget, and I said, well, I've got about a $100 budget. And he said, well, the convergence is obvious. AIMS is in the research and development world. They're not in the implementation world in the long term. We're in the implementation world, so the convergence there is quite obvious. And we're involved with people from AIMS as part of the RAP program and a collaborative program there at Moore Reef with some other operators of the same scale as me. But in the future, we're obviously going to have a broader cross-section of the community involved, including the marine aquarium industry that has its shore-based facilities, and people who use technology, because technology is going to be the key. But this is the most important thing. This is my team, by the way. That's Stuart Christie, the CEO of Terrain. He was also the inaugural CEO of Reef Restoration Foundation. I hired him at Terrain, as I've been a director there for many years. In hiring him out of his role at Reef Restoration Foundation, it also meant that I could just move into his role. You've got to love a small town. So what does it look like now? This photograph was taken at Moore Reef last Thursday. It sprung back as it does. You know, the Great Barrier Reef may have maybe on a trajectory that doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, but when you see the way that the reef rebounds when it's left alone 5 years down the track, it's roared back to life. But what we're seeing though is that it's all in the top 5 metres of water depth, and they're all pioneer species. You'd expect that. So what I do is at Moore Reef, which is our main production site, we source our donor colonies from about 3 or 4 metres depth, put them in the nurseries for about 3 months, But then when we plan them out, it's 6 to 12 metres. I'm trying to make insurance populations against warm water and wild weather. So that's where we're at. Look, I'm getting to the end. How far below this line we want to go is going to depend on how humanity, not people in this room, how serious we are about turning things around. Biodiversity is our biggest defence against climate change. We need to have that front of mind with everything that we do. We can keep business as usual as that lower line. We probably never get back up above that line with business as usual. We've got to try and turn things around, and this takes an integrated effort. I look at the drivers of the Industrial Revolution from a couple of hundred years ago, the adoption of new technology, the increases in efficiency in production, and the changes in the way that we produce energy to drive an economy. We're actually in an industrial revolution now, except that it has a totally different trajectory that comes out of the other side of it. It gives me optimism. I'm not one to throw my hands in the air, and I think that every species on Earth is a survivor, and humans in particular. So I'll leave it at that and take any questions, presumably. And yes, that's me.
Thanks, Ryan. I might get you just to stand at the podium if that's okay, just so that your answers to questions can be picked up for our people streaming. Now, Ross has got a microphone at the back as well, and we will open it up to questions, anybody. It's a fascinating thing and quite scary at the same time. Anybody with a question for Ryan, just raise your hand. Please. And I'll get you to speak into the mic if that's okay, again, just for our streaming friends.
Yeah, Ryan, question might sound crazy, but is nutrient in the water okay for coral, but it's also helping its predators? So that's why we don't want nutrient in the water, because if you fertilise the coral, would it grow better and faster if you could fertilise it?
Coral reefs are oligotrophic. They don't want nutrients. It's a fine balance. The coral animal gets its nutrients from photosynthesis by the algal symbiont. If you introduce nutrients to that environment, it prompts the growth of algae, and when you have the growth of algae, you can, in the longer term, get what they call a phase shift, where you shift from coral domination to algal domination. But look, nutrients come out of rivers, they come out of pristine rivers. Doesn't matter what's upstream, nutrients come out of it. They're a fact of life. But they also provided long ago the rise of herbivory and the importance of that niche on coral reefs. So it's elevated nutrients, yes, it's a problem, but it again needs to be kept in perspective. Thanks for your question.
Anybody else? Raise your hand at the back. Yes. Oh, just a moment, sir. I'll just bring the mic to you. Sorry, mate. Sorry to put you on the spot. You can sing a song too if you want. It's all good.
Morning, Ryan. Just quickly, when you are planting them, the rest of that reef beds, what do you work on per year, per hectare? Is it a hectare or metres, or what do you want to go to per year? And what happens when we do get a cyclone, which it could be a good year for it?
Yeah, look, this is the vexed question, and I guess it's my response is going to reflect the fact that it's a discipline that's only been practiced on the Great Barrier Reef for 5 years, 5 years and 2 months. And the fact that we're at the lower rungs of the ladder is that we tend to measure not in hectares. I work on hard substrates, and I try and populate at least 20% of bare hard substrates, because when there's a coral spawning event, and the lucky survivors, who are the ones that get fertilised and they make their way to settlement, which is a tiny minority, what they're looking for is safety. So I try and make critical mass on bare substrate, so a chemical signal is sent to those fertilised gametes that here is the place to settle. So you don't need to build a reef, you don't need to cover the whole of a patch of hard substrate. It's the same sort of thing with rubble. Cyclones cause an enormous amount of rubble, and those rubble fields take decades to recover. The binding process of that loose is generally done by different species of sea sponge and different algae. So different methods now being employed to try and stabilise that rubble so that we can fast track the development of that. If it sounds like I'm obfuscating, the answer to the question is because it is a very difficult question to answer. But yeah, I plant deeper to avoid future warm water and to dissipate the effect of wild weather. Whether I'll be doing that once we have convergence with the work being done in the Reef Restoration Adaptation Program, which is assisted evolution, where they breed the algal symbiont outside of the coral animal, stress test it with ever-increasing water temperature, and the algal symbionts that thrive in that environment, they'll put them back together with stressed corals and they'll breed those corals. That's the start of a very long process in itself, because there's 1,500 species. I hope that answered your question in some way. I don't think it really did.
Do we have any more questions? It really is a fascinating insight. Anybody at all? Ryan, if it's okay, I've got one from a tourist town in Cairns. Can I ask, is there anything, any program or anything that is including international tourists into what you're doing? Any education programs, any ways that they can see what's going on and what you're doing?
Our permits are very restrictive. I can't have anyone who's uninducted participating in the program, and they've got to have some qualifications and so on. You can participate as an allied activity, and some tourism operators will charge people to swim down and take photographs and things like that. I've just redesigned our coral nursery so that I can unclip the nursery from a main line anchor rope, and then we can swim that across to a beach, pontoon or back deck of a boat, in which case you take the diver out of the picture and people are allowed to then participate. I can't make any money out of it, but my tourism partner can. So there's always more than one way to skin a cat. It is the future though. It's going to take some change of thinking. But like I say, the discipline in this country has been around for 5 years, so it's early days. We work in an environment that is heavily regulated, has a very large bureaucracy that drives that regulation, and turning that around is like turning the Queen Mary around.
Do we have any other questions? Or is it just going to be me again? Because I am absolutely fascinated in this, Ryan. Can I ask as well, through education, whether it be primary school or secondary or even university, tertiary, doesn't matter, are they up to date and involved? Because the people of Cairns, I can assure you that we're all very aware of your reporting through the ABC and other news outlets, etc., especially with the spawning event in November. Is there anything further education through the young, etc., towards this sort of area?
Oh, absolutely. And my team are all dynamic speakers, and they love presenting what we're doing, and we do it in conjunction with our partners out at Fitzroy Island Resort, where we have a program for school groups. Next couple of weeks we'll be going out with study cans with visitors from other countries. And yeah, we run a program because the younger generation are very, very switched on, and they're looking at how they can interact, whether it's an online thing. I don't know anything about that, but they do. So anything that we can offer for young people to get involved, they'll be the drivers.
Fantastic, mate. One question at the back. Good on you, Ross. Ross is on the job. Just over there. Thanks, mate.
You mentioned the impact of TNT farming in other regions. I noticed that Tony Rossi from TNT Farming Techniques is going to be presenting later. Will you guys be involved in a collaborative Q&A panel at all?
I missed the first part of the question. It sounded like something to do with a hunter. What was it?
You mentioned earlier the impact of TNT on coral reefs, and I noticed that Tony Rossi from TNT Farming Techniques is here today. Will you guys be working together anytime soon? I'm just having you on, mate. It's all good.
The first part of the question is a little bit lost on me, but I'll always work with Tony for sure. I'll
Thanks.
just leave it at that.
Good stuff, mate. Anybody else? Over here at the front.
Thank you. Where do you see the role or the potential role of ever-increasing regulation on what happens in our environment and other environments, my meaning agriculture versus cities and so on? Where do you see that happening, and is it going to happen?
It's a tough one. I guess agriculture is an easy target. It involves a small number of people, fixed tenure. Cities are burgeoning places. I much prefer the result, what I'm seeing here in front of me and what I've been seeing at Terrain for many years, is about bringing people together to work together. Obviously, if there is growing urgency in the trajectory, then there's need for regulation, and I'm sure that growers know that there's other growers who aren't taking the lead that you are. And like I say, anyone who breaks the soil is altering the landscape. But that's a very good and well thought out question. We're ever increasing urbanisation, not only in the big cities, the regional towns are turning into cities. I guess what it comes down to is incorporating external costs of production into the price of goods and services. Is it correcting market failure? That's probably the mechanism, I would imagine, that would affect supply and demand. We see a lot of these developing programs and biodiversity credits. Carbon credits have copped a bit of a hiding lately, but the purpose of those schemes is to internalise the full cost of production into the price. So I would imagine more of a market mechanism than a big stick regulatory mechanism. Just my thoughts.
Well done. Any last question at all? No? Sounds good. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure you've been as fascinated as I have. Would you please thank Ryan, everybody? Ryan, we've got a little something for you as well, mate. Good on you, mate. Thanks so very much. Absolutely fascinating subject and a fantastic presentation at the same time as well. Now, before we move on, look, I've been in Cairns many a year, and I thought you'd be interested on just some of... Who's staying in the Pullman International here at the moment? Hands up, where are they? Oh, majority, okay. So I thought I would let you know, in my years in playing in bands and things like that, I've got some very good friends right the way through the hospitality industry, and I thought that you just might like the top 10 things, as in feedback, that hotels, not only in Australia and Cairns, there's a few Cairns examples that I've got here, but right the way through the world as well for you. Top 10 feedbacks to hospitality places. Number 1, complaint from this person. It took us 9 hours to fly home from Jamaica to England. It took my friends from America only 3 hours to get home. This seems grossly unfair. Comment number 1. Number 2, are you ready for this one? Just imagine the brain power behind this one. I compared the size of our 1-bedroom suite to our friend's 3-bedroom suite, and ours was significantly smaller. Why is this? Comment number 2. You're starting to get my drift here of some of the comments that we get. Are you ready for this one? Now, I know that this one just happened to be who had breakfast out. I know that this was done at a luncheon in Coco's, where you're having breakfast and meals and things. Are you ready for it? A guest here complained that his soup was too thick and strong, but he was instructed by the person that he was actually sipping the gravy. Very tasty. All right, number 4. Are you ready for this one? Especially gents. Here we go. A tourist at a top African game lodge overlooking a waterhole spotted a visibly aroused elephant, complained of the sight of it and that this rampant beast had ruined his honeymoon by making him feel inadequate. Beautiful work. Oh dear. All right, we'll move on. I've got a few more for you. All right, you ready for this one? Girls, where are you? You ready? Here we go. The brochure stated, there are no hairdressers at this resort. We're trainee hairdressers, and we think we knew, and they've just made us wait longer. We didn't know that we wouldn't be included in anything, thinking that there were no hairdressers allowed other than no hairdressers on the place. Yeah, very nice. All right, next one. Anyone been to Spain? Yeah, there's a few of us, all right. It's, this is a report to a Spanish hotel. It's lazy of the local shopkeepers in Spain to close in the afternoons. I needed to buy things during their siesta. Practice should be banned. Very nice. Next one. Ready? It is your duty as a hotel to advise us of any noisy or unruly guests before we arrive. Yeah, good thinking. Here's the next. My fiancé and I requested twin beds when we booked into your hotel, but instead we were placed in a room with a king bed. We now hold you ultimately responsible and want to be reimbursed for the fact that I became pregnant during this stay. This would not have happened if you had put us in the room that we were booked. Yes. No fault policy there, is there? And the very last one, ladies and gentlemen. We booked an excursion at a water park, but no one told us we had to bring our own swimsuits and towels. We assumed that this would be included in the price. So that is just a quick snapshot of exactly what some of our hotel people put up with. Hope you're enjoying the stay here at the Pullman Cairns International. We've enjoyed it so far. Great place here as well. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Now to set the scene, we've got a video for you coming up next. Now, it will give you all an overview of Project Catalyst Growers' initiatives and influence. Right now, we're going to see a video. Let's virtually visit to the Wet Tropics, where Alan Lynn, Robert Benassi and their extension service providers continue to grow ideas that influence the adoption of practice change.
Soil health is starting to come more to the fore. People are starting to worry about it as we deplete our soils, knock them around, and losing organic carbons. It is coming to the fore, and I think it's the farmer's biggest asset is his soils. That's something we have to look at and have to look after. A bit over half of the property are heavy clays, very hard to manage. They're the ones that prompt me to change what I was doing more than the good soils are very easy to work. The heavy clays are extremely hard to manage.
Now that
100 acres because I've got to go over that country 3 times, maybe have to rotary hoe it. So there's time and time and time and time in the cab that you could be doing other things. So my neighbour said to me, why don't you have a crack? I said, we've stumbled across this machine. We're trying to build one, so I went around to the shed and had a look at what they were doing, and I couldn't believe what I saw. And I just said, well, can I borrow it or can you do it on my place? So we did 10 acres. Then the next year was 50 acres, and then now anywhere up to 200 acres. So it's allowing us to plant 75 acres a day.
I had a lot of growers interested in legumes, but they just weren't sure where to start. And their biggest issue was actually around the bean planters. The first couple of growers, I just said, oh, well, I'll get you in contact with Alan. Alan, I believe, was in fabrication and engineering before he retired. So he's always had his cane farm, but he used to build a lot of equipment and machinery for cane farming. So that's his specialty. And he's just fiddled and kept playing, and he's done all the hard work for everyone. And then there's always been a number of growers come to Alan for advice on how to build lots of different types of machinery.
It started off with a machine I used to just bed up, and then we bought an old returning disc, and that wasn't a great success. And then I built a little renovator out of an old set of returning discs, and it worked really well. Then I had to make a roller up to suit, and eventually we got the roller you see now is the one we stuck to. It seems to work really well. And then this was just a larger version of that little renovator disc. Close spacings, the disc spacings are only 150 because closer the disc, the more fines you produce, the wider the disc, the bigger the lump, especially in the heavy clays. It wasn't until I bought my first GPS in 2009 that was a catalyst for major change. That first change was probably a row spacing change to 1.8. And then from there, mounds, bean planting, multi-species, and then in the last 4 or 5 years of trying to keep my mounds and just renovate the mounds without using the rotary hoe and to be gentler on the soil. 2 to 3 passes is my plant strategy now with little renovator usually into whatever residue is left over from the multi-species.
This particular block has had mud ash at 100 tonne to the hectare under the mound and then a legume crop on top of that, and then followed up with another soil sample saying it still needed 1 tonne to the acre of lime and magnesium. So we applied that last year. The results are here. You can't control the weather. If we keep going dry into December, well, it hurts. We've seen that off the back of the last 2 years, having a really dry year, and then last year having a very extremely dry year, and then all of a sudden flooding. Soil health, I think, is very crucial. Trash blanketing, stopping our runoffs. We go into a mounding plant, we plant, and it's sprayed and it's kept plant, and that's why I'm where I am. We're always trying to go back to catalysts, see if someone's done something different, if we can adapt that and try to make things better.
I've got a farm that has been my basket case farm, if you want to put it that way. It struggled for years growing anywhere from 25 to maybe a maximum average 29 tonne to the acre, which is not very good. It used to grow 35s and 40s, but because we're planting cane on top of cane and we're never resting the soil properly, we're only doing maybe a 6-month fallow, maybe even less. I bumped into an agronomist at a field day one day. Let me come and give you a hand. I'll do something for you. And that's how it all started, the ball roll. He said, mate, got to look at legumes. I'll show you how to do a soil test, a proper one. Don't use a shovel that you've been mixing concrete in because it's got calcium on it. So just they're the little things that people don't realise they're making the mistake. In 5 years, I've turned that farm around. It's a 100-acre block. It went from the 29s, then it averaged 33 this year. We are looking at a 5-year cycle now. It's averaged 35. The varieties in that time since, say, 2005 hasn't changed. I'm still using those core varieties, and that's what I'm using now on that particular farm. And then I slowly bring in my other newer varieties that I want to trial. And this farm is now producing 35 tonne to the acre.
The great thing about the legumes with the bean planting is you don't need all the big fancy equipment, and you can take the old equipment that you've got and modify it to what you need. So
this seems to be quite a popular option today from what I was, hearing from the growers. Just explain what we're looking at here.
So what we've got here is the yellow part on the top is the air seeder, and then he's got it on the min-till coulters. The air seeders are really popular in the sense that they're not overly expensive to purchase. They're very light, they fit in the back of the ute, and you can put them nearly on any sort of base that you've got.
What other options are there?
There's the Hodge boxes that are on the back of Hayden's planter. There's the little boxes on the SRA min-till planter. But yeah, you've pretty much got a box to put it in. You can stick it on top of something. So.
How important is that cultivation, that preparation, the mounding and all of the things we're seeing demonstrated here by Alan Lynn today?
So it's really going back into your soil health, and with what Mark's idea is also minimising time. So if you don't have to cultivate your paddock 6 or 7 times, and you can bring that down to 3, or with Mark's case 1, then you've got a whole hell of a lot more time up your sleeve to get more work done.
The start of everything should be is your soil agronomy, what your soil is doing. Because we are complaining about, we're not growing cane like we used to. I'm finding that your agronomy, your soil health, knowing what your pH is and what your levels of aluminium and what's in your soil and what's happening with your soil, makes your job easier in what you're planting. If your soil is now healthier, you can grow anything.
Why did you want to be involved with this event today?
Because I think there's easier ways of doing things. I'm probably a bit fortunate. I'm in a little bit easier country to work in. Some people are, like Alan here, has got tougher country to work with. He's got a lot of water logging, whereas my country is light sandy grounds, no flooding. Generally the same what we do to plant cane, but as in getting ground ready, it's a lot easier.
I've got all the weight on the roller, I've got the linkage right down on full float, and as fast as it'll drop, because 11 clicks, and that roller controls your depth. Your linkage cannot, at 11 clicks, can't compensate for you fast enough, because by the time it registers, you've gone 15 metres and you end up. And especially if you're trying to get ground ready for people to plant into, that billet planter driver, he'll want to punch in the head if your drill interspaces aren't level. What are you laughing for, Robert? Shed meetings like this and people being on ground in the paddock and seeing for themselves, neighbours watching over the fence, that type of thing. I do think if you can if you're going to do a major practice change, it is very advantageous to have a buddy, someone you can buddy up with, talk things out, bounce ideas off and share failures.
We went to Alan Lynn's and Alan spoke on how he plants his legumes, how he works his soil. So I take away from Alan, I think Alan and I have the same goals. At the end of the day, we like to grow legumes, we want to get our soil healthy. I do quite a bit of contract work, so I like to get that all mounted up, ready for rain, and then I have my own seed planter that once I have my own moisture in the ground, I then go back and plant mine at a later date, where Alan's working his ground and planting the beans at the same time and hoping he gets the right moisture to get a good crop of bean. So we have the same goal, we just take different roads to get there. So that's one really good thing that I like to take away from Project Catalyst, is going to these projects and seeing other guys what they do, having the same thought, but maybe taking a different road. And we're quite happy to tell our story and help other people maybe turn their direction or whatever it is, but we don't hold back.
Legumes are a really good place to start if you're wanting to improve your soil health. The first thing you'll see is that better soil structure. So once you've had your legumes in and then you've gone through with your renovator, your soil just comes up like cotton candy. Nice and fluffy and soft and breaks down easy. It's not big, hard and lumpy. You're not having to turn it into talcum powder.
We're going to see if we can try grow soybeans for maybe even harvest, take them to seed. We got to suck it and see how we go with that one. But my traditional would have been ebonies and sun hemp, and Lawrence has given me another mixed species to start adding to it and see if we can maybe sort some other problems out in the soil. So if we can get 70 to 80 mil of rain and get our mounds nice and moist, and temperature, we're starting to learn temperature in the soil's very crucial to when you plant soybeans. So if we can get that nice and moist, which will lower the temperature of the soil, and go in and plant and get a good strike. Soybeans, as everyone knows, they're quite hard to get up to about 6 inches high. Once they're 6 inches high, they're pretty hardy. The sea is only about 6 kilometres from here, 5 kilometres in a straight line, so I'm not far. You can see there's National Park right there. They just did a number count on mahogany gliders 3 weeks ago in that particular block, and they did trap mahogany gliders. Are they looking at what we do? I think they are. So we have to be on our game.
You learn off everybody. Doesn't matter what practices they got, you implement what you want to do. I had my uncle pass away, so I had to sort of step up and start learning a bit more, because I was sort of learning his way, and then I had to start asking questions. And those questions weren't just based on, oh, you're coming, not only just to coming to these meetings, but talking to your neighbours. And I will generally never talk to anybody, because if some people get an idea in their head and they think, oh, you're a little bit crazy, you know. So I said, well, I'll say nothing for a few years. And then my next door neighbour goes, well, what's going on here? I said, you couldn't grow a cane here. I said, well, it's growing. You need to talk to people and just pick their brains. Ask the stupid questions. I'm good at that. I ask stupid questions all day long. You can ask my wife, holy smokes.
It's important to tell people, don't be afraid to make a mistake. And I think you can only do that on farm. You can't do that, tell someone that sitting in an office. And you've got to demonstrate it. Like I have a partner, we've been in partners probably 15 to 20 years with machinery, a high rise, fertiliser boxes, mounders, different equipment. And we've never had an issue in sharing. And we bounce ideas off each other, and that's been a catalyst for moving forward, I think. I follow him sometimes and he follows me. Just sharing ideas.
Feels like the Keystone Cops.
Yeah.
Round of applause for there.
Soil health.
A fantastic video, I can tell you. You can just feel the passion right the way through that. Can I give a huge thank you to Flow Key Productions, Kim Clyden down the back, and Jack. Where's Jack? Jack's hiding at the back. There he is. Down the back from Flow Motion Media for producing that story as well. Can I also thank Megan Zarmel, Alan Lynn, Robert Benassi and Mark Zatter for sharing your knowledge and experience right the way through that as well. Just absolutely, please do. Just to let you know, Mark will be present during the breakout session this afternoon as well, including Ryan Donnelly as well. So if you'd like to ask those guys any further questions or pick their brains, that's the time to do it. Can I just, before we're getting closer to morning tea, it's all good, I can feel the caffeine vibe coming on. Can I please thank again the forum partners, because nothing really happens without their assistance. The Australian Government Reef Trust and Great Barrier Reef Foundation, Coca-Cola Foundation and WWF again in Australia. Please give them a big round of applause. Thanks so much. Speaking of sponsors, coming up very soon, we've got morning tea as well. Can I thank Reef Catchments, Mackay Whitsunday Isaac Limited as well. So please give them a big round of applause for what we're about to receive. Project and trial presentations are coming up after the break. So